Good afternoon, YouTube. This is Wi-Fi Willie of the Raiders Rundown. Today we are going to break down Josh McDaniels' presser. This is the first presser he's done since being announced as the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to go over what he said about Derek Carr and several other players on our team. But before we get into it, remember to like this video if you're watching it. It really helps me out. And subscribe to this channel so we can build this audience and keep the Raiders Rundown going. By the way, if you're watching this press conference live, it was straight trash. I don't know what is going on with the Raiders media team, but you need to figure out how to do a live stream. And if you need help, then hit up Wi-Fi Willie and I'll come over and help you, Raiders, okay? Because you guys need some help. But check out what Josh McDaniels said about Derek Carr.
No specific things relative to extending that at this point, but that doesn't mean that's not going to change. We are aware of where we're at on that in that process. I think we're just trying to get everything kind of set now in the building. You know, our staff is obviously, this has been a big chunk of this first 3 or 4 weeks, is trying to put the right people in place here. I've met and spoken to Derek a number of times now, just trying to begin our relationship. I think it's really an important one. The head coach, the play caller, the quarterback, we're aware of where things are.
What I find the most interesting is that he's clearly saying the staff has been fully invested in figuring out Derek Carr first. It's the biggest piece to the puzzle that you have to lay down to figure out how all the other pieces will mold around that. But what I found interesting is that Josh McDaniels said that he's excited to begin that relationship. To me, that implies the relationship hasn't begun. I'm sorry, bro, but you've been the coach for a month and this relationship hasn't started. It's barely beginning. What's going on here? Yeah, he said he's spoken to Derek Carr a number of times. We don't know how many times that is. If he's only spoken to Derek Carr 3 times in this past month, that's pretty weird to me. I'm going to be quite honest. This thing needs to get going because guess what? Free agency, the window, it's happening in 12 days. Other players and their representatives are going to want to know what's going on with the quarterback. Where's the extension happening? If you're a receiver, you're not going to sign a long-term deal with the Raiders. If Derek Carr doesn't have a long-term deal, you're going to want to know, hey, who's throwing me the football? You don't want to end up being like Allen Robinson on the Bears. You don't have the greatest numbers because you got someone like Mitchell Trubisky throwing you the football. So other players are going to want to know, other agents want to know, and the fans, we want to know what's going on with Derek Carr. I do think it's a concern. I do think it's weird that this has not started yet. However, based on Josh McDaniels' comments, it seems like this is going to drag out. Perhaps we won't even know if Carr is going to be a Raider next year and the year after and the year after that until June. We're going to have to wait until probably June in the summer to see that contract extension happen. And a lot of people who do not respect Derek Carr say that he should play on that $19 million contract on a prove-it deal. And I just think that's a slap in the face to somebody who would be the #1 free agent quarterback if they're on the market right now. It's a slap in the face to somebody who's been a part of this organization for 8 years when they haven't put many great pieces around him. And I don't think his agent is going to let him do this to himself. And I don't think Derek Carr wants to do this to himself. I think he wants more respect. He wants more say in the organization and he wants a multi-year deal. That's what he wants at the end of the day. That's what his agent wants. And the only thing getting in the way of that right now seems to be Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. And here's some of the comments that I also did not like, just talking about building the roster in general. Check this clip out.
You need to be able to look at the whole year as an opportunity to improve your team. It's not just small windows in March or April. You know, being patient and trying to develop your roster over time and taking a longer term approach to it is something that we're going to try to do. We know we have areas where we got to address them at some point, whether that's a frontline player or depth.
So there are some comments I thought that implied that this is a rebuild. And Mark Davis said this is not a rebuild earlier. That's what he said. We reported on that. And now Josh McDaniels is sort of talking about how you need to build and go for a championship at the same time. I'm sorry, Josh McDaniels, call me cynical, but I do not think you could do both of those things at the same time. You cannot rebuild and go for a championship at the same time. People want to try to act like the Bengals went from the bottom all the way to the top in just 1 year. No, bro, they tanked 2 years. They tanked 1 year to get Joe Burrow, and then they tanked again to get Jamar Chase because Joe Burrow was injured. They were rebuilding for multiple years. They didn't just come to the Super Bowl freaking out of nowhere. And so Josh McDaniels' comment seems like he's filling out the roster. He talked about how we're trying to improve. Sure, you can say he has to say that. He has to say he's going to evaluate every position, but he could also say, and other people do say this, that this team just needs a few more pieces to go to the championship. He could say that if he had more things in place, if he had Derek Carr in place, if we had Max Crosby in place, if we had all these negotiations worked out, then you could say that. And maybe he's not saying that because he doesn't believe it, because he thinks he needs to rebuild this roster. Josh McDaniels is saying this is going to be a long-term process. They have a long-term approach to the roster and building this team. That means that everything's not in place yet. That means they're thinking of the long game. That means maybe you trade away some pieces so you get more picks and work on the long game. To me, this is feeling like John Gruden in 2018. When you're playing the long game, you're playing a rebuild. That's what you're doing. So either Mark Davis is lying to us or Josh McDaniels is trying to fake out his enemies. Josh McDaniels is trying to get people like Andy Reid and the Chiefs to think that we're going on a long rebuild, but really we're going to go all in this next year. We got to see what happens. We got to see where the chips fall. And I hope he's just trying to fake out his opponents. I hope this is not a rebuild, because Raider fans, we don't deserve another rebuild. We have gone through too many rebuilds. We have not seen our team, our franchise, really invest heavily in players, invest heavily in talent and say, this year we're going all in. And it's about time you do this, because you have a quarterback right now who's better, who's just straight up better than most quarterbacks in the NFL. Teams are desperate for QBs right now. They're struggling to get one. The draft does not have many great QBs available. The time is now. And if you don't go all in right now, you just might miss your shot. But right off the bat, Josh McDaniels was asked about first round pick Alex Leatherwood.
There's good and there's bad. But when you're that young, you look at it as what can we work with? What can we fix? There's a lot to do in that process. I've already spoken to him. That process is underway. And I think what we'll end up doing is whatever's best for the Raiders. You know, he's shown the ability to play, in both spots. More guard last year than tackle, but we see him being a contributor. We see him being a guy that we're really excited to work with. We're going to try to get the most out of him.
We know Alex Leatherwood had a really rough season at right tackle, had to move to guard in the 2021 season, and was actually the most penalized offensive lineman in the NFL and has one of the lowest PFF grades of any offensive lineman in the NFL. So Josh McDaniels was asked about this guy. What are you going to do? Is he going to stay at guard? Is he going to stay at tackle? He didn't have a clear answer, but he did look at Leatherwood and say, you know what? This guy's young. He could work with him. He could mold him into the guy that he wants him to be. It's just going to be his second year in the NFL this next year, so it's good to see that McDaniels has a little bit of optimism about how he can make Leatherwood worthy of that first round pick. Josh McDaniels says they'll evaluate the roster in the spring.
But once we know the language and we're able to talk it together, I think really the next thing we do is start putting things out there and trying them, and figuring out what your players do well, what do they handle the best. And then if they do some things well and you add to it, if they do some things that you don't feel like we can make better, then maybe we move away from it.
He tried to say 3-4 and 4-3 does not matter, but if you're going to evaluate your roster in the spring, obviously you're going to make some changes based off scheme. In the spring, if people can't mentally get with it, they can't mentally understand the game plan, he's going to make some changes. Josh McDaniels also talked about Mac Jones, said that he was a great QB. One interesting thing he said about Mac Jones was this.
I was really fortunate to have a chance to coach him. And the people that had touched Mac Jones prior to him coming to New England, deserve a tremendous amount of credit. The people that coached him in high school, the people that coached him, at Alabama, the parents that raised him, they did a great job with him as a human being. And
what I find interesting about this is he's saying give credit to the coaches around him, the people who coach Mac Jones. Mac Jones comes from Alabama, so Josh McDaniels is basically saying Alabama produces QBs who can compete at the NFL level in their first year. So be on the lookout for us to pluck some talent from Alabama. You saw Mike Mayock love to pluck players specifically from Clemson, and it appears Josh McDaniels probably has a decent relationship with Nick Saban. So we'll see what happens there. Hopefully we draft some pretty good talent. I'm closely anticipating the draft. We are going to go live on Thursday at 6 p.m. Be sure to check that out if you want to hang out with us during a live stream on the Raiders Rundown. I also now have a merch store. The link is in the description below. Get yourself a free Gruden t-shirt, because screw the NFL for getting rid of Gruden. I'm still salty about that, but we got to move on. And hey, we're going to be moving on and checking out everything going down with Josh McDaniels this season. So be on the lookout every single day for some new Raiders content and Raiders analysis. This has been Wi-Fi Willie of the Raiders Rundown. Peace out and have a good one, and I hope to see you on the next one.